The night air cut through Madison with a sharp, unforgiving bite. Streetlights flickered along Langdon Street, their golden glow bouncing off the icy pavement. Lila Smith moved briskly, her scarlet coat vibrant against the muted gray of the sidewalks. Every step she took seemed ordinary until it wasn't. The rhythm of her heels echoed in the cold, quiet night, each tap a countdown no one could hear. Lila had laughed only hours earlier at Professor Sterling's home, her mind buzzing with excitement over the grant that would launch her next exhibit. Friends had called her the Dynamo, a force impossible to ignore. Her eyes, bright with curiosity and intelligence, scanned the familiar streets, as if mapping every crack in the pavement. Tonight, she carried more than her usual essentials. Her leather satchel held notes and rare photographic plates, treasures of history she had sworn to protect. Each step was a thread weaving the story that would end too soon. There was no warning, no shout, no struggle. Just the hush of the night pressing close. Lila didn't know, couldn't know, that these were the last moments she would walk freely through Madison. A presence, unseen and calculated, lingered in the shadows. The air itself seemed heavier, a quiet threat brushing past her senses, subtle but unmistakable. Have you ever walked alone at night and felt eyes on you? Felt the hairs on the back of your neck rise as though the darkness itself had been waiting for you? That's exactly what this night carried for Lila. An ordinary walk turned into an irrevocable point of no return. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you don't subscribe now, you may never uncover the truth when someone disappears in your own neighborhood. Don't stay silent. Comment below why you won't subscribe, and let the world know. The warmth of Professor Sterling's home still lingered on Lila's cheeks as she stepped back into the night. Inside, laughter had flowed freely, clinking glasses celebrating her grant approval. The recognition of a brilliant mind finally rewarded. She had captivated the room with her stories of rare daguerreotype plates, her eyes sparkling with knowledge and pride. Each word she spoke carried ambition, drive, and an unyielding sense of purpose. Everyone in that room knew she was destined for something extraordinary. Her colleagues had crowded around, offering congratulations with smiles that didn't hide envy. Julian Thorne, always a step behind her in intellect and achievement, had exchanged a terse look with her over a minor interpretive debate. Lila had brushed it off with her characteristic humor, but tension lingered in the air, unnoticed by anyone else. Then there was Harrison Reed, the wealthy patron, leaning just slightly too close, his compliments brushing the line between admiration and desire. Lila's polite refusals were firm, yet no one had realized the small storm swirling around her, the subtle warning signs of ambition clashing with greed and obsession. As she gathered her satchel and the fragile photographic plates, her mind replayed the evening's discussions. The plates were irreplaceable, holding not only historical value but secrets that some would kill to possess. Her careful handling of them wasn't just diligence, it was protection. She had studied every shadowed corner of the university archives, memorized the safe routes home, and still, the city's quiet streets had never felt more vulnerable. The transition from the warmth of the gathering to the cold night was jarring. Madison's streets, familiar under the amber streetlights, suddenly felt like a different world. Every echo of her footsteps bounced back as if the night itself was listening. The satchel pressed against her side reminded her that what she carried could ignite desire, envy, or worse, violence. She had worked tirelessly to safeguard history. But in that moment, Lila couldn't foresee the danger stalking her path. In these final moments, the juxtaposition of triumph and peril collided. The celebration's laughter faded behind her as the shadows of the streets grew heavier, carrying the first whispers of fear that no one else would hear until it was far too late. Lila, radiant and unafraid, was already walking into a nightmare carefully hidden within ordinary life. The walk from Professor Sterling's house to her apartment should have been familiar, comforting a mere 10 blocks through the quiet university streets. Lila adjusted her scarlet coat against the cold, her breath visible in the night air, a rhythmic puff marking every step. The leather satchel, heavy with her notes and the rare photographic plates, swung gently at her side. Every instinct in her body screamed alertness, but she dismissed it as the usual nerves of a brisk evening stroll. The city, usually alive with late-night students and the hum of distant traffic, felt oddly muted. Shadows stretched unnaturally along brick walls, flickering streetlights cast uneven glimmers, and a quiet unease crept into the edges of her mind. Something was off. Not loud, not obvious, just a pressure, a weight she couldn't name. And then, silence deeper than the usual nightfall pressed against her. Somewhere along the street, Lila vanished. No struggle, no shout, just a sudden erasure from the world she had known. Hours later, the first chilling sign appeared. Her scarlet coat, folded neatly and deliberately, resting atop the hood of an abandoned Plymouth Fury near Lake Mendota. Its neat placement was almost cruel, as if mocking the life it once warmed. The satchel was gone. The photographic plates, gone. Only the coat remained, a silent scream against the cold night. Detective Alistair Finch, later called to the scene, would describe it as too clean, too precise, too intentional. The city didn't yet know it, but Lila's disappearance would ripple through Madison like a shockwave, igniting fear, suspicion, and anger that would smolder for decades. Families locked doors earlier. Students refused to walk alone. The streets, once ordinary, now held danger lurking in the stillness. Have you ever felt someone vanish from the world in front of your eyes, someone brilliant, untouchable, gone in a heartbeat? That is the tragedy of Lila Smith. Her life, her laughter, her ambition, erased in a night that promised only safety. And if you don't subscribe now, you may never uncover the truth when someone disappears in your own neighborhood. Comment below why you won't subscribe, and show that you're willing to stay unaware while the next tragedy could be just around the corner. The first glint of red against the pale silver of the abandoned Plymouth Fury caught the eyes of the patrol officer making his routine rounds. A coat, Lila Smith's scarlet wool coat folded with almost cruel precision, lay on the car's hood. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no disturbances in the snow-dusted ground. It was as though the coat had been placed there for one purpose: to be found. The leather satchel that had carried Lila's notes and rare photographic plates was nowhere in sight. Every careful step she had taken, every protective gesture she had made with those fragile plates, had ended in disappearance. The realization settled on the officer like ice. The young woman who had walked confidently through Madison only hours before was gone. Completely. And the only trace of her presence was folded neatly on a car hood, a silent testament to what had been stolen from the world. Detective Alistair Finch arrived soon after, scanning the scene with his measured, quiet intensity. Every detail mattered to him. The coat was clean, untouched by mud or damage. The hood of the car showed no fingerprints or marks. The absence of evidence screamed a careful, deliberate act. Whoever had taken Lila had thought of everything, leaving nothing to chance. Finch knew immediately that this was not random. It was a calculated removal of a life, leaving behind only a single symbol of the person stolen. He knelt beside the coat, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The questions came fast and merciless. Who would do this? Why leave the coat behind? And what did the absence of her satchel and plates mean? But what detectives discovered next made the case even stranger. Detective Alistair Finch stepped onto the frozen ground, his boots crunching softly on the thin layer of ice and snow. He had seen missing person cases before, but this was different. The coat, the emptiness, the precision, every instinct told him that the person who had taken Lila Smith had done so with a cold, careful purpose. Nothing here was accidental. Finch crouched beside the folded scarlet coat, noting its immaculate placement. It was almost taunting in its orderliness. Whoever had left it had a message, but it was a message he could not yet read. The hood of the Plymouth Fury bore no smudges, no prints, no signs of hurried action. The coat itself was untouched by mud or grime, pristine against the harsh winter night. It was a cruel contrast to the violent act it symbolized. He let his gaze drift to the surrounding streets. The familiar neighborhood, usually alive with students and passers-by, felt frozen in anticipation. Street lights flickered in rhythm with the beating of his own heart. The air carried no witness, no hint of movement. Lila's satchel and her precious photographic plates had vanished, leaving behind only questions. Finch knew immediately. This was not a random crime. It was deliberate, planned, and executed with a clarity that made his pulse quicken. Every detail mattered, and yet the trail was already cold. As he rose, surveying the silent neighborhood, he felt a growing weight of urgency. Time was already working against them, and with each passing hour, the window to understand what had happened was shrinking. The stage was set for a case that would challenge the limits of patience, skill, and human endurance, a case that would haunt Madison for decades. Detective Finch began the painstaking process of speaking with everyone connected to Lila Smith. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, each conversation a small thread in a web that stubbornly refused to form a clear picture. Each alibi checked, every statement logged, yet nothing solid emerged. The precision of her disappearance was maddening. Julian Thorne, a fellow PhD candidate, described his interactions with Lila in painstaking detail, yet nothing tied him to the night she vanished. Harrison Reed, the wealthy museum donor, insisted his movements had been above scrutiny, his presence elsewhere verifiable. Witnesses offered glimpses of normalcy, a student leaving a library, a neighbor walking a dog, but no one had seen her after she left Professor Sterling's gathering. Every lead ended in silence. Every theory collided with fact or absence of evidence. Finch could feel the frustration mounting, not just in himself, but in the officers assisting him. The coat, folded and clean, became an obsession. Why leave this behind? Why take the satchel and plates, but nothing else? It was a puzzle that taunted him, every answer slipping further into the cold. The community watched with growing unease. Questions spread like frost. Was someone still nearby? Was Lila in danger elsewhere? Parents pulled children indoors earlier than usual. Students stopped walking alone at night. Fear seeped quietly into the streets. Finch documented everything, knowing each detail mattered, even the smallest inconsistency. The sense of helplessness pressed down on him, and he understood that this case could quickly slip from active investigation to cold file. Yet, he refused to let it fade into the background. Somewhere in the silence, a clue waited, invisible to the untrained eye, but screaming to someone who would listen carefully enough. But what detectives discovered next made the case even stranger. Days passed, and the investigation ground forward with agonizing slowness. Detective Finch reviewed each interview, each observation, each fragment of evidence, yet the picture remained incomplete. The streets of Madison were quiet, but a tension lingered, invisible yet sharp, pressing on everyone who had known Lila. The absence of witnesses frustrated Finch most. There were no shouts, no sounds of struggle, no accidental footprints in the snow. The carefully folded coat suggested intention, planning, even calculation. Whoever had taken Lila had thought ahead, leaving behind only a single piece of evidence that teased both clarity and confusion. Every lead dissolved into another dead end. The satchel, the photographic plates gone without a trace. Friends and colleagues offered reassurance they did not feel. Neighbors remembered only ordinary moments. Finch sensed the case teetering on the edge of despair. The clock was ticking, and every day that passed without answers hardened the impossibility of the investigation. Owen Smith, Lila's younger brother, began making daily appearances at the precinct. His grief was palpable, sharp as the winter air. A reminder that the missing woman was not an abstract case file but a sister, a daughter, a light snatched from the world. Finch felt the weight of that loss acutely. It pressed down on him in a way no report or procedure could lessen. By the end of the week, it was clear. The Lila Smith case was slipping toward a cold reality. The community's unease grew alongside the frustration of law enforcement. The carefully placed coat, the vanished satchel, the absent plates, they all became symbols of a crime that refused to yield its truth. And yet, Finch refused to abandon the pursuit. Somewhere in those silent streets, in that empty apartment, or hidden within what was taken? The answer waited a secret, waiting for someone patient enough, persistent enough, and observant enough to uncover it. Detective Finch returned to the precinct, carrying the images, notes, and measurements from the scene. The scarlet coat remained in his mind not just as evidence, but as a message he was determined to understand. Its deliberate placement suggested a mind at work, someone who wanted to mislead, confuse, or communicate in a language only they understood. The satchel and the rare photographic plates were missing, stolen in a way that suggested a purpose beyond mere theft. Finch studied the reports again. The timing of Lila's departure, the route she had taken, the absence of witnesses, every fact seemed ordinary at first glance. Yet together, they formed an unnerving pattern of calculated absence. It was as if someone had erased her from existence, leaving behind only symbols of what she had carried and what she had protected. He cataloged each detail in a new file. The precise fold of the coat, the lack of footprints around the car, the missing satchel, the vanished plates. Each observation became a thread, waiting to be woven into a narrative that refused to emerge. Finch suspected that someone had intended for these threads to be found, a riddle left by a person who had believed they were beyond discovery. As night settled over Madison, the detective couldn't shake the feeling that Lila's disappearance was not about opportunity but about control. Whoever had taken her understood the value of what she possessed, and the lengths someone would go to hide it. The coat, the missing items, and the calculated absence were not just physical evidence. They were warnings, challenges, and fragments of a puzzle that would haunt this city for decades. Somewhere in the silent streets, a story was waiting to be told, one that only those who noticed the smallest of details would ever uncover. The morning sun revealed a chilling reality across Madison. Lila Smith's face stared out from every corner on telephone poles, bus stops, and the front doors of small shops. Each poster, carefully printed with her smiling eyes and hopeful expression, felt like a scream frozen in paper. People stopped mid-step, clutching their belongings, their stomachs twisting at the stark reminder that someone they knew had vanished without a trace. Parents lingered at school gates, questioning whether their children were truly safe. Students paused outside dormitories, whispering hurriedly, sharing fragments of information and rumor. The vibrant university neighborhood felt smaller, tighter, constricted by fear. It wasn't just the loss of a single young woman. It was the sudden realization that safety was fragile, fleeting, and easily shattered. Even those who barely knew Lila felt her absence. The community's pulse had shifted. It beat unevenly, quickened by uncertainty and worry. Shopkeepers glanced over their shoulders, neighbors spoke in hushed tones, and every ordinary sound, footsteps on frozen sidewalks. The screech of a car braking felt amplified, ominous. Amid the fear, a quiet determination simmered in some hearts. Conversations began, questions were asked, and the face of Lila Smith became more than a photograph. It became a symbol of vigilance, of the need to pay attention, to act when something is wrong. Imagine losing someone this brilliant and vibrant. How would your town react? The question hung in the air, unspoken but heavy, as the streets echoed with the unrelenting presence of her absence. The campus, once alive with the familiar rhythm of student life, had changed overnight. Libraries were quieter, hallways more cautious. Students who once moved freely between classes now walked in pairs, eyes darting to shadows, ears straining for the slightest sound. The disappearance of Lila Smith had left a void that wasn't just her absence. It was the echo of vulnerability, the sudden awareness that the world could be cruel and calculated. Late-night study sessions became rare. Cafes that had been buzzing with laughter and debate now felt tense. Conversations hushed, as if speaking too loudly might summon unseen dangers. Dormitory doors were locked earlier, and strangers were regarded with suspicion. The ordinary routines of the academic community were overwritten by caution, fear, and the relentless question, who could do this? And why? Even professors, usually insulated in their lectures and seminars, felt the anxiety. Meetings were shorter, eye contact sharper, voices softer, as if each sentence might provoke something unforeseen. The energy of curiosity and scholarship, once abundant, was replaced by vigilance and concern. In every corner of the campus, students and faculty alike carried a shared weight. The reality of Lila's disappearance had transformed every familiar street, every well-trodden path, into a corridor of uncertainty. Each glance over a shoulder, each pause before entering a building, reflected the collective unease, the way fear had seeped quietly into the fabric of daily life. It wasn't just her family who ached. The community, young and old, was gripped by the emotional resonance of a life interrupted, a future stolen. The shadow of loss had settled, and Madison felt smaller, colder, more fragile than it had the night Lila Smith vanished. 3 weeks after Lila's disappearance, the first snow arrived. It fell quietly, covering Madison in a blanket of white that seemed almost too still, too complete. Streets and sidewalks disappeared under its weight, muffling the sounds of the city, yet amplifying the tension that had settled like an invisible fog over the campus and neighborhoods alike. Families huddled indoors, windows drawn against the cold. Yet the warmth could not reach the corners of unease that had taken root. Students crossed the frozen courtyards with lowered heads, their breath visible in the icy air, hearts quickened by a fear that refused to dissipate. The snow highlighted the absence of normalcy, accentuating the missing laughter, the vanished footsteps of a woman who had once brightened every room she entered. Even the familiar lights of dormitories and street lamps offered no comfort. The white streets reflected their glow, but it was a pale, hollow light, unable to fill the void left by Lila. Every rustle of the wind through bare trees, every distant car passing, became a reminder that something had been taken from the community, something irreplaceable. Detective Finch, walking alone along the frozen paths, felt the weight of the town's collective anxiety. Each footprint left in the snow seemed to mock the futility of their search. The city's energy, once vibrant, had slowed to a cautious, tense rhythm. The fear was no longer confined to family or friends. It had spread, infecting even those who only knew her face from posters, from whispers, from news reports. The snow fell heavier, colder, until Madison itself felt suspended, waiting for answers, waiting for justice, waiting for the invisible thread that could unravel a disappearance so complete that even the winter could not cover the emptiness left behind. The city's unease deepened as the days stretched into weeks. Detective Finch and his team scoured every lead, interviewed every witness. Yet each thread dissolved into silence. The absence of evidence was maddening. It was as if Lila had been erased not only from the streets, but from the memory of those who might have seen her. Frustration shadowed the faces of the police, mirroring the tension that gripped the entire town. Conversations in homes, cafes, and dormitories were dominated by her disappearance. People speculated, worried, and feared for themselves as much as they did for her family. Every knock at a door, every stranger passing by, became a potential threat in the minds of the cautious. The city that had been secure, predictable, and vibrant now moved in careful hesitation. Parents whispered warnings to their children. Students whispered fears to each other. Teachers glanced at their classrooms with concern, realizing that the bright, unshakable confidence of youth could be shattered in a single, unexplainable night. The uncertainty weighed heavily. The lack of resolution magnified every shadow, every sudden sound, every late-night step outside. The town was learning a painful lesson. When someone vanishes without trace, the emotional toll extends far beyond the immediate family. It spreads quietly, infecting the rhythm of daily life, making every familiar space feel fragile, every ordinary night heavy with apprehension. Detective Finch watched the community's fear, the uncertainty etched into every face, and understood that this case was no longer only about solving a crime, it was about holding back a rising tide of despair. The weight of Lila Smith's absence had transformed Madison into a city on edge, a place suspended between hope and dread, waiting for answers that refused to arrive. Julian Thorne had always been a figure on the edge of Lila Smith's orbit, A fellow PhD candidate, he was brilliant, ambitious, and fiercely competitive. Their rivalry had simmered for months, boiling over in heated debates about research methods, interpretation, and recognition. Colleagues whispered about Julian's jealousy, noting how he bristled whenever Lila received praise or attention that he believed should have been his. When Lila vanished, Julian became an immediate person of interest. Detectives scrutinized his movements that night, tracing every detail of his claimed alibi. Friends testified he had been drinking heavily at a bar 3 miles away, laughter spilling into the cold night as though nothing could penetrate his bubble. The police verified every timestamp, every witness, yet a quiet unease remained. Julian's proximity to the victim, combined with his known tempers, painted him as a man capable of desperate action, if only circumstantial hints could be turned into proof. Despite the surface clarity of his alibi, Detective Finch could not shake the sense that Julian's anger, his obsession with recognition, might have propelled him to act in a moment of uncontrollable impulse. The hours stretched endlessly as investigators weighed evidence, interviewed colleagues, and combed through records. Julian's frustration with Lila was documented. His presence on that night was confirmed. And yet, nothing concrete tied him to the disappearance. Every question raised about Julian, every suspicion, seemed to dissolve in the harsh light of verification. Still, the unease lingered not just within the police, but within the community that had started noticing the subtle tensions among those closest to Lila. Was Julian merely a rival, or was there a hidden, darker intent behind his studied rivalry? Harrison Reed was a different kind of presence in Lila Smith's life. Wealthy, older, and commanding attention without effort. A generous museum donor and patron of the arts, Reed had provided the funding that enabled Lila's groundbreaking research. Yet generosity came wrapped in control. Colleagues recalled Reed's insistence on meetings and his subtle pressure, the kind that could bend decisions without leaving a visible mark. Detectives quickly noted that Reed had motives beyond mere interest in art. He had approached Lila privately on multiple occasions, conversations that reportedly made her uncomfortable. Yet, each time she had deftly redirected or refused, a clear line drawn between professional respect and personal boundaries. When questioned, Reed's timeline was tight, his movements precise. His cabin outside town offered no surprises, everything accounted for, everything neat. Still, the unease surrounding him lingered. His wealth and influence cast a shadow that complicated investigation, creating an invisible barrier against suspicion. Detective Finch, familiar with the subtle interplay of power and ambition, recognized the danger of dismissing Reed too quickly. Influence and opportunity often hide in plain sight, camouflaged by charm and credibility. Reed had both. And yet, the forensic sweep revealed nothing. No traces linking him to Lila's disappearance, no hint of confrontation, no evidence of theft. The contrast between Julian's fiery ambition and Reed's calm, controlled demeanor left investigators frustrated. Both men were entangled in Lila's world, both capable of resentment, yet neither provided the proof necessary to move the case forward. The city watched, uncertain, whispers of suspicion spreading quietly through faculty halls and cafes. Who do you think is hiding something? Comment below. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Finch meticulously mapped every connection, every encounter, every fleeting interaction that Lila had experienced in the days leading to her disappearance. Julian Thorne's simmering rivalry and Harrison Reed's controlling influence became the focus, each detail analyzed under relentless scrutiny. Motives were clear in theory: jealousy, ambition, or the desire to control priceless artifacts. Yet in practice, proof remained stubbornly elusive. Julian's alibi held under examination. Witnesses corroborated every step, from the first sip of beer to the late-night conversations in the bar. The energy of the crowd, the laughter, the hours spent in public view, all painted a picture of innocence. Still, Finch felt the tension beneath the evidence, the subtle emotional spikes that hinted at deeper resentment. Could someone act on impulse in a single, unguarded moment, leaving nothing behind to reveal their guilt? Harrison Reed's movements were precise, almost rigidly so, a pattern designed to avoid scrutiny. Meetings, calls, and private visits to his cabin were all accounted for, every alibi supported. Yet the investigator could not ignore the pressure he had applied on Lila over her research, the invisible weight of expectation that might have provoked a desperate reaction. Wealth and influence were shields, but the human mind often falters when pushed. Each suspect, while suspicious in tone and character, remained untouchable under the law. Evidence did not exist, only suspicion. The dead ends multiplied, creating a maze of questions with no answers. Finch understood that the case was entering a critical phase. It was no longer merely a disappearance. It was a puzzle with missing pieces. And the community's fear grew alongside the detective's frustration. Who do you think is hiding something? Comment below. Weeks turned into months, and the relentless scrutiny of Julian Thorne and Harrison Reed yielded no breakthroughs. Every lead dissolved into ambiguity. Every line of questioning circled back to emptiness. Detective Finch, normally unshakable, began to feel the weight of frustration pressing like the Wisconsin winter itself, cold, sharp, and unyielding. The community's patience frayed alongside the investigator's resolve. Rumors of motives, whispered speculations, and hushed debates filled Madison's cafes, libraries, and dormitories. Who could act in secret while appearing ordinary? Which smile masked resentment, and which handshake concealed a plan? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Julian maintained a rigid normalcy, his competitiveness untouched by suspicion. Reed, calm and poised, continued to move through the city like a man untouchable. Every gesture measured, every meeting accounted for. The contrast between their personalities deepened the sense of mystery, leaving detectives to grapple with a truth that was both infuriating and unsettling. Brilliance and wealth can shield even the darkest impulses from exposure. Detective Finch cataloged every inconsistency, every odd glance, every minor contradiction, but the trail remained cold. The case file grew heavier with notes, sketches, and observations, yet thinner in actionable evidence. The absence of proof weighed as heavily as the absence of Lila herself. The frustration, the community's mounting unease, and the haunting image of Lila's scarlet coat left all who followed the case unsettled. It was a chilling lesson in human complexity. Appearances deceive, and suspicion alone cannot reveal the truth. The puzzle remained intact, its edges sharp and unresolved, leaving Madison trapped in a tense limbo of fear, curiosity, and unanswered questions. Owen Smith stepped into his sister's apartment with a quiet dread, each footfall echoing through the sunlit space that still smelled faintly of sandalwood and ink. The apartment was unchanged, almost unbearably so, as if time had frozen the moment before tragedy struck. Every item, every book, every canvas seemed to hold a memory, a fragment of the sister he had loved and now feared he would never see again. He ran his fingers along the spines of her art history volumes, pausing at the familiar titles Lila had always kept in a precise order. On the wall, her half-finished canvases leaned slightly, betraying the hours she had poured into them. A portrait of Frida Kahlo, usually aligned perfectly, now tilted just enough to demand notice. It was a small imperfection, but one that screamed the presence of absence, proof that the meticulous hand behind it was no longer here. Owen's eyes fell on the scattered remnants of her personal life. A half-written postcard to a friend in Paris, the fountain pen left uncapped, and a notebook brimming with notes on rare photographic plates. Each detail carried the weight of anticipation, promise, and now, unbearable loss. He inhaled deeply, the faint lingering scent of her perfume and workroom ink clinging stubbornly to the air, and it felt like a whisper from the past, a message he was desperate to understand. Every corner, every object seemed loaded with significance, calling him to remember, to investigate, to grasp the truth behind the absence. This apartment was more than walls. It was a witness, holding fragments of Lila's last night, begging for interpretation. Could you piece together a mystery from these tiny details? Owen moved carefully through the apartment, every detail a potential message left behind by his sister. A notebook lay open on the small desk. Pages filled with Lila's precise handwriting, diagrams of her photographic research, and cryptic notations. Each entry seemed mundane at first glance, yet to Owen, they hummed with meaning, a puzzle he had to decipher. On the kitchen counter, a cup still bore the faint imprint of her lipstick, abandoned mid-sip. Her scarlet scarf, folded neatly on the chair, echoed the meticulousness she applied to every aspect of her life. It was a presence and an absence at once, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. He noted the faint fingerprints on the edges of her notebooks, her habit of turning pages carefully, almost reverently, as though preserving something vital for the future. The apartment revealed more than items. It revealed patterns, intentions, and personality. The half-written postcard hinted at plans that would never be fulfilled, an invitation to a friend now suspended in time. The slight tilt of a painting, the subtle disarray of her papers all suggested a mind that thrived on order, yet was caught in the chaotic swirl of life and ambition. Owen's heart tightened as he lingered on a stack of photographic plates, long since missing from their usual place. He could almost feel the weight of the knowledge they contained, the secrets Lila carried, and the danger that had accompanied them. Each subtle clue fed his resolve, his grief, and the gnawing need to uncover the truth. Owen paused in the center of the apartment, letting the silence press in. Each breath carried the weight of memories and absence alike. The apartment was no longer just a home. It had become a vessel of grief, holding fragments of a life that had been violently interrupted. Every item whispered a story. Lila's determination, her laughter, her sharp mind all suspended in the cold light of reality. He traced his fingers along the edges of her canvases, lingering on the strokes that had taken hours, perhaps days, to complete. The care in each line mirrored the care she had taken with her research, her life, and the people she loved. Now, that meticulousness had become a map of loss, a silent record of what had been taken from him, and from everyone who knew her. The lingering scent of sandalwood and printer's ink tugged at his memory, a ghostly tether to moments he could no longer reclaim. His gaze fell on her half-written postcard again, each word incomplete, like a conversation cut short. The apartment offered no answers, only questions, each more pressing than the last. It was here, in the quiet agony of these small details, that Owen's grief became intertwined with determination. He was no longer merely a brother mourning a sister, he was a sentinel over her story, refusing to let it fade into obscurity. Every detail, every subtle clue, anchored him to a painful reality. Lila's life had ended, but her memory demanded justice. Owen understood that the fight to uncover the truth would not be swift, but it would be relentless. The apartment was both a prison and a compass, guiding him through grief toward the answers that had eluded everyone else. As Owen walked from room to room, the apartment seemed to breathe with a quiet, unseen presence. It was as if Lila's essence lingered in the faint scent of her perfume, in the organized chaos of her research notes, and in the gentle disarray of her half-finished canvases. Each corner, each object, carried a story that only he could begin to comprehend. He lingered at her desk, eyes scanning the notebook filled with intricate sketches and annotations. The notes hinted at discoveries she had made, fragments of knowledge that were now potentially dangerous. The missing photographic plates weighed on him. He understood their value, but more importantly, he sensed their significance to someone who would go to unimaginable lengths to possess them. The tilted portrait, the postcard left incomplete, the subtle markings on the notebooks, they were all part of an unspoken message. Owen felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Every small detail mattered, and yet the apartment offered no guidance. The silence was heavy, and in it, he imagined her voice, sharp and unwavering, urging him to see the truth others had missed. His grief was raw, an aching pulse that threaded through every step. The apartment, once a safe haven, had transformed into a silent witness to loss, a vault of secrets that demanded vigilance. Owen realized that in searching these subtle clues, he was not just seeking answers, He was preserving the essence of Lila's life, her brilliance, and her courage. Owen lingered by the window, watching the fading light touch the city streets below, each shadow a reminder of the night his sister vanished. The apartment, once filled with her laughter and energy, now throbbed with absence. Every object he touched, every paper he examined, reminded him that Lila had been stolen from the world, and it was his responsibility to carry her story forward. He moved with a purpose that grief alone could not create. Each notebook page, each scattered sketch, became a roadmap, a collection of traces left behind, hints of what she had seen, and warnings she might have known to leave. The missing photographic plates weren't just evidence. They were a key to understanding her death, and Owen could feel their significance pressing against him like the cold of an approaching winter. In the quiet, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of anger, frustration, and sorrow. His sister had been brilliant, vibrant, and alive, and the world had failed to protect her. Yet amid the pain, a stubborn flame ignited. He would not allow her life, her work, or her memory to fade quietly into forgotten files. Every subtle clue in this apartment was a thread to pull, a message to decode, a path toward justice that he alone could follow. Owen's hands trembled slightly as he traced the edges of her scattered research, his mind connecting patterns invisible to everyone else. The apartment was no longer a home. It was a battlefield, and he was armed only with persistence, love, and an unyielding sense of duty. He would not rest until every secret hidden in this space had been uncovered. Owen stood in the center of the apartment one last time, letting the quiet engulf him. Every detail, her scattered notes, the tilted portrait, the lingering scent, pressed down with unbearable intensity. Grief twisted with resolve, and he understood the stakes. Uncovering the truth was no longer optional. It was a necessity. The apartment, a silent witness to a life cut short, had become his compass. Each clue, a spark, lighting the path toward justice. He would not allow the shadows of fear and loss to claim his sister's story. The missing photographic plates were unlike anything anyone in Madison had ever seen. Fragile, delicate, and historically invaluable, they were 19th-century daguerreotypes capturing moments of early Wisconsin life, preserved with an almost obsessive care by those who understood their significance. To Lila Smith, they were more than artifacts. They were the backbone of her dissertation, a key to interpreting the state's cultural evolution through images that had long been forgotten. Each plate carried a story, a whisper of lives long gone, and Lila had treated them with reverence, as though she could channel the past through her own meticulous observation. When her satchel disappeared the night she vanished, so too did the plates, leaving an absence that was immediately felt by anyone who understood their worth. Detective Alistair Finch recognized instantly that this was no ordinary theft. The crime had been surgical, precise. The plates were the reason someone had taken Lila, and someone had taken them because their value went far beyond monetary gain. Finch could sense the weight of history clinging to them, the kind that could motivate obsession and inspire desperation. Weeks of scouring the apartment and Lila's workspace produced only one tantalizing clue. Tucked inside the pages of a leather-bound edition of the History of Art, a small handwritten index card lay hidden, almost imperceptible. It bore a name and a number. Elias Vance, Vault 41. Finch stared at it, a chill running down his spine. A single card, containing a hint that Lila had left behind, might be the key to understanding everything. Detective Finch sat alone in his office, the dim light casting shadows across the stacks of files that documented Lila's disappearance. His eyes kept returning to the index card. Elias Vance, Vault 41. It was a fragment, almost laughably small against the enormity of the crime. Yet he could feel its importance as surely as he felt the winter wind biting through Madison streets. The plates weren't just stolen, they were the reason Lila had been taken. Someone wanted them desperately, someone willing to silence a brilliant young woman to possess what she protected. He spread out photographs of the plates on his desk, tracing their edges with a gloved finger. Their historical significance was staggering. Few collectors, even among the academic elite, could comprehend their value. Yet, Finch was convinced that the motive was not greed alone, it was fear of exposure. Lila had seen, documented, and understood something that could unravel carefully concealed schemes. Whoever had taken her knew it, and they had acted to keep those secrets buried. Finch's theory began to crystallize. The index card was not random. Vault 41 hinted at a secure, private location, possibly a repository or society specializing in rare collections. And Elias Vance, was it a person, an alias, or an organization? The possibilities multiplied, each more unsettling than the last. The detective could almost feel the ghost of Lila guiding him, a whisper in the margins of her notes insisting he follow the trail. Every angle pointed toward a truth just out of reach, a puzzle that required patience, intelligence, and intuition. Finch realized that this single card, hidden for decades, was the thread that could lead to the answers no one had dared to uncover before. As the investigation progressed, the stakes surrounding the missing plates became painfully clear. Finch realized that Lila's disappearance was not a random act of violence. It had been calculated, deliberate. The absence of her body, the folded coat, and the vanished satchel all pointed to someone who understood the value of timing, silence, and control. The plates were not just fragile artifacts. They were evidence, leverage, and the silent motivator behind a crime no one could yet fully explain. Finch revisited every person in Lila's orbit, scrutinizing their movements, motives, and connections to rare collections. Each interview revealed glimpses of ambition, envy, or desire, but nothing concrete. The shadows of suspicion fell across colleagues, donors, and even those considered friends. Yet despite the breadth of his inquiry, the detective could not shake the feeling that the real threat remained unseen, waiting beyond the edges of the investigation. Whoever had orchestrated this disappearance had planned for decades of obscurity, relying on the obscurity of the plates and the city's forgetfulness to protect themselves. Finch's mind returned to the index card. Elias Vance, Vault 41, was more than a clue. It was a signal, a faint pulse of Lila's foresight. Whoever had taken her underestimated her intelligence, leaving a breadcrumb of information that only a determined detective could follow. The plates, Finch concluded, were not merely valuable, they were dangerous, capable of exposing a network of secrets and illicit dealings that had thrived for years unnoticed. With each passing day, the urgency grew heavier. Finch felt it pressing down like the Wisconsin winter. A constant reminder that the truth was buried just out of reach, and that the missing plates were the key to unlocking decades of silence. Decades stretched between Lila's disappearance and the quiet threads of evidence she had left behind. Finch stared at the index card again, its simplicity belying its significance. Elias Vance, Vault 41, was a lifeline to understanding a crime shrouded in cold, unyielding mystery. Each plate represented not only history, but the potential to reveal a truth someone had worked tirelessly to hide. Finch could feel the weight of that secret pressing across the years, connecting past and present with a subtle, terrifying gravity. He imagined Lila walking toward a rendezvous she had arranged, clutching her satchel, unaware that each step was being shadowed by someone who intended to erase her. The careful folding of her coat, the deliberate removal of her belongings. It was as if the perpetrator understood that the plates were more than objects. They were keys to power, to silence, to control. Finch realized the crime was not impulsive, but threaded with planning that required patience and knowledge. The detective's mind traced the possible paths the plates could have taken, each hypothesis more disturbing than the last. If they survived, where were they hidden? Who had access? The answers were locked away, waiting for someone to notice the subtle pattern Lila had left. Finch's gut told him that even the smallest clue could unravel a network of lies carefully maintained for years. Every detail, every fleeting observation pointed to the same conclusion. The plates were not just missing. They were the center of a silent storm, a secret waiting for discovery. And hidden in plain sight, the index card pulsed like a quiet beacon, a thread reaching across time. Weeks turned into months, and the missing plates seemed to cast a shadow over everyone connected to Lila. Finch noticed subtle shifts in behavior, hesitations in interviews, unspoken glances between colleagues, and the quiet tightening of lips when questions turned toward Lila's research. Fear, he realized, was layered beneath the surface of civility. The plates were not just objects of history. They were symbols of something far more dangerous. Whoever had taken them had cultivated silence, relying on the weight of unspoken threats to keep people in line. Each lead Finch pursued ended in dead ends or half-truths. The local museum staff seemed genuinely shaken but evasive when pressed about Lila's recent work. Donors and acquaintances smiled politely, their eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty, as though someone had instructed them not to speak too freely. Finch felt the presence of the perpetrator everywhere, in the quiet corners of libraries, in the locked doors of private collections, in the careful organization of historical artifacts. Every detail whispered the same chilling warning. The plates were central, and they were watched. Amid the silence, the index card remained a fragile lifeline. Finch returned to it often, turning it over in his hand, pondering the significance of Vault 41 and the name Elias Vance. It was a small clue, easily overlooked, yet Finch sensed it contained the solution. Lila, even in her absence, had left a message, a subtle challenge for those with eyes sharp enough to see. The detective understood that time alone would not reveal the truth. The plates, the index card, and the quiet fear surrounding them formed a puzzle that demanded patience, courage, and attention to every subtle detail. 41 years had passed since Lila Smith vanished from the quiet streets of Madison. Her disappearance had become a ghost in the city's memory, whispered in old corridors and forgotten in dusty case files. Detective Calla Reyes, young, relentless, and unafraid of shadows, saw the old files differently. She didn't see dead ends. She saw stories waiting for resolution, threads that could finally be pulled. The faded case documents, once heavy with frustration, now offered opportunity. Modern technology, unimaginable to Finch in 1982, promised clarity where once there was only darkness. Calla pored over the reports, photographs, and witness statements. The neatly folded scarlet coat, the vanished satchel, the rare photographic plates, all details that had haunted Finch for decades, sparked a surge of determination. The old evidence, preserved with care, was now a potential treasure trove for forensic breakthroughs. Calla's mind raced with possibilities. Re-examining fibers, revisiting witness timelines, and, most critically, attempting DNA extraction techniques that could pull the past into the present. Every corner of the old investigation seemed to pulse with secrets. Every word in Finch's notes a warning and a clue. The detective felt the weight of the Smith family's decades-long suffering, a burden she could not ignore. She knew that even the smallest trace, overlooked for decades, might hold the key to justice. After 4 decades, a single hair strand could solve everything. Before we continue, if you aren't subscribed yet, imagine being the one who missed the moment justice was served. Comment why you won't subscribe before you miss it. Calla Reyes stared at the glow of her computer screen, scanning the digitized evidence from 1982. Every photograph, report, and handwritten note had been meticulously transferred into her system, creating a map of events frozen in time. The tiniest fibers, once ignored as irrelevant, now demanded attention. The Y chromosome trace, found on the collar of Lila's coat, was unlike anything available in Finch's era. It was a ghost, a faint signal that connected the past to the present, and for the first time, technology could make that ghost speak. Genealogical databases became her allies. Public and private records, digital archives, and DNA profiles from willing participants opened doors that had been slammed shut for decades. The hair strand, once a mere fragment of evidence, transformed into a living clue with the power to trace family connections, uncover hidden lineages, and reveal a network of possible suspects. Calla felt the chill of anticipation, the first spark of hope that Finch had chased his entire career. Yet, the detective knew the fragility of this process. One misstep, one assumption, could erase decades of progress. Every match had to be verified. Every connection double-checked. The weight of expectation pressed down, not just from the department, but from the lives still impacted by Lila's disappearance. Each breakthrough was a thread tugging on the tightly wound coil of a long-forgotten crime, threatening to unravel decades of silence. After more than 40 years, the past was no longer untouchable. The coat, the plates, and the faint trace of DNA could finally speak volumes. Calla realized that justice, long delayed, was not impossible. It was merely waiting for the right mind and the right moment to awaken. Weeks of painstaking digital work finally yielded a spark of clarity. Calla Reyes leaned back, eyes fixed on the screen, heart hammering. The Y chromosome profile from Lila's coat had produced a partial match, someone connected by blood to an individual in the genealogical database. The realization was immediate and electric. The long shadow of a 41-year-old mystery was beginning to lift. A door that had remained sealed for decades now creaked ajar. The detective traced familial lines, cross-referencing property records, historical society memberships, and archived correspondence. Each piece added weight to a growing picture. The matches weren't complete, but they offered direction, narrowing the impossible list of potential suspects. Calla's pulse quickened. This wasn't just data on a screen. This was hope for a family who had lived in uncertainty, and a challenge to the person responsible for shattering Lila's life. Every new connection brought a mixture of dread and anticipation. The careful orchestration of the crime in 1982, the deliberate theft of rare plates, the vanished satchel all suggested someone calculating, someone used to hiding behind respectability and trust. Calla knew that as she closed in, the perpetrator's past would be forced into the light, and nothing, not time nor position, could shield them forever. This single trace of DNA was more than a fragment. It was a lifeline. For the first time in over 4 decades, there was a tangible path toward justice. The silent witnesses of the past, the coat, the plates, and Lila's careful notes, had spoken through modern science. After 4 decades, a single hair strand could solve everything. Calla Reyes could almost feel the decades of unanswered questions pressing down as she traced each lead. Every name, every address, every archived note began to form a lattice of hidden relationships, connecting lives in ways no one had imagined. The Y chromosome hit was only the beginning. Now, she had to determine how this genetic breadcrumb fit into a puzzle, frozen in time, a puzzle whose missing piece had haunted Madison for more than 40 years. Each thread she pulled revealed deeper layers of deceit. Lila's meticulous records, the rare photographic plates, even her final index card, Elias Vance Vault 41, were no longer isolated anomalies. They were part of a carefully constructed trail, left by a brilliant mind who had anticipated danger and sought to protect the truth. Calla traced the index card through corporate archives, historical society memberships, and property filings. Every discovery intensified the urgency. Someone had taken extraordinary measures to hide the truth, and the consequences had been deadly. The detective's pulse quickened with a mix of fear and determination. One wrong step could destroy the fragile lead, but the breakthrough was undeniable. The DNA, combined with the decades-old notes and records, was revealing a pattern. The crime was no longer a cold, unsolvable relic of the past. It was a story reaching across time, daring justice to catch up. The echoes of Lila's life, her brilliance, her courage, her relentless pursuit of knowledge resonated in every click, every keystroke, every carefully analyzed record. Calla understood the weight of the moment. She was the bridge between a family's decades-long anguish and the truth that had waited silently, quietly, for its revelation. After 41 years, the past had begun to speak. Calla Reyes felt the tension in her chest tighten as she compared the genealogical leads with historical records of the Elias Vance Society and Madison's academic circles from the early 1982s. Every small connection, once overlooked, now gleamed with significance. The coat, the plates, the index card, they were no longer scattered pieces of a cold case. They were pieces of a pattern revealing a hidden network of motives, opportunity, and betrayal. The detective's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she cross-referenced names, dates, and familial links. The Y chromosome hit provided a critical anchor, narrowing the list to individuals connected both by blood and by access to Lila's research. Each lead she followed brought the chill of reality. Someone once trusted, someone in Lila's immediate circle, had been hiding behind normalcy for decades. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but it also sharpened her focus. Calla's mind replayed Lila's last known movements: the walk home, the celebratory laughter fading into night, the neatly folded scarlet coat left like a signal. Now, decades later, those silent markers were being illuminated by modern investigation, finally revealing the contours of a crime long thought lost to time. As the pieces aligned, the case transformed from an unsolvable cold file into a living, urgent pursuit. The distant past was colliding with the present, demanding accountability. Calla understood that every keystroke, every analysis, was not just an academic exercise, it was a race to restore truth to a life stolen too soon. After 4 decades, a single hair strand could solve everything. If you aren't subscribed yet, imagine being the one who missed the moment justice was served. Comment why you won't subscribe before you miss it. Calla Reyes stared at the archival documents, her heart tightening as pieces of the decades-old puzzle began to align. Elias Vance was not a person, as Finch had assumed in 1982. It was the name of a small, private historical society located 60 miles outside Madison. Publicly, the organization specialized in preserving obscure 19th-century artifacts. But behind closed doors, their acquisitions revealed a troubling pattern of secrecy and questionable legality. The detective realized that the plates Lila had been protecting were only the surface of a much larger scheme. Every ledger, every donation, every internal note hinted at a carefully guarded network of transactions that skirted the line between preservation and theft. The name Vault 41 in Lila's handwritten index card suddenly held weight. It was no random number. Calla traced the designation through internal society archives and discovered that Vault 41 was a climate-controlled storage room, secured for artifacts of immense value. The plates had been stored here all along, hidden in plain sight, protected by the very system that allowed their theft. A chill ran through Calla as she connected the dots. Lila's foresight was extraordinary. The young scholar hadn't left her notes as a whim. She had created a precise map to the evidence she feared would be taken from her. The realization settled like ice in Calla's stomach. Lila had been aware of the danger she faced, and her disappearance was no random act. It was a targeted strike to protect stolen treasures. The magnitude of the discovery pressed down on Calla. The crime was bigger than a missing student. The murder, the hidden plates, and the years of silence were part of a story of corruption, greed, and betrayal that had gone unnoticed for over 4 decades. We all thought this was just a missing student, but it was so much deeper. Calla's investigation peeled back the layers of the Elias Vance Society's operations, revealing a network built on careful manipulation and quiet deceit. On the surface, the society appeared scholarly, dedicated to the preservation of history. But the documents, correspondence, and private acquisition records painted a starkly different picture, one of systematic collection that ignored legality, where priceless artifacts were quietly diverted from public trust to private hands. The rare photographic plates Lila had risked everything to protect were the crown jewels of this hidden enterprise. Their value was not just monetary. They were irreplaceable pieces of Wisconsin's history, proof that someone had chosen profit over integrity. Calla could almost feel Lila's presence in these rooms, her intelligence and foresight whispering through the annotations she left behind. Each note, each handwritten reference pointed toward a truth that had been buried by time, fear, and the influence of those determined to hide it. As the detective traced the flow of stolen artifacts, it became clear why Lila had been targeted. The murder was not random, it was premeditated, a direct response to her knowledge. Her index card, small, unassuming, was a precise marker to Vault 41, the secure storage holding the evidence that could expose decades of fraud. Calla's pulse quickened as she realized how much courage it must have taken for Lila to leave that clue, fully aware that her actions could make her a target. The gravity of the situation settled over Calla like a storm. Every step she took through these archives brought the society's dark practices into sharper focus, revealing a conspiracy that had remained invisible to the world for over 40 years. The threads of greed, deception, and betrayal connected seamlessly, and Lila's role as both witness and unwitting protector of the truth could no longer be ignored. Calla sat surrounded by stacks of papers, photographs, and digital scans, the weight of decades pressing down on her. Every document she examined, every ledger and note, began to form a pattern. Lila's index card, the meticulously kept records of the Elias Vance Society, and the missing photographic plates were all part of a single, terrifying narrative. The pieces fit too neatly to be coincidence. It was becoming clear that the murder had been motivated not by passion or personal vendetta, but by greed and the desperate need to silence a witness. Lila had uncovered a theft, a systematic removal of historical artifacts that someone powerful had protected for years. Each transaction, each acquisition recorded in the society's files, now served as a roadmap to the crime. Calla could feel the tension of those final moments in 1982. Lila walking home, fully aware of the danger surrounding her, clutching knowledge that could bring a hidden empire to its knees. The detective cross-referenced the index card with internal storage records and society correspondence. Vault 41, once a meaningless phrase on a small piece of paper, revealed itself as the final link. The plates had never been lost, they had been deliberately concealed. The careful planning of the crime, the precise placement of the scarlet coat, the disappearance of the satchel all made sense in this context. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that neither the plates nor the person safeguarding them would emerge unscathed. With each connection made, Calla understood the depth of Lila's foresight. She had left more than a clue. She had left a challenge. Her brilliant mind had mapped a path to the truth, daring anyone to follow it. And now, 41 years later, that challenge had finally reached its reckoning. Calla's next discovery brought the stakes into sharp relief. Hidden within the climate-controlled vault, tucked carefully among ledgers and fragile archives, were the daguerreotype plates Lila had risked her life to protect. Their surfaces, delicate and shimmering, reflected decades of secrecy and human greed. Every fingerprint, every smudge told a story, a silent testament to those who had handled them and tried to erase evidence of their crimes. The detective's hands trembled slightly as she carefully documented each plate. Lila's foresight had been extraordinary, each item secured, indexed, and marked in a way that only someone paying attention to detail could understand. The index card, once a cryptic hint, had guided Calla to the very heart of the crime. Here lay the proof that would finally illuminate the darkness that had claimed Lila's life. As Calla examined the storage logs and annotations, it became clear that the theft and concealment had been orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of both the society's operations and Lila's research. The careful planning of the murder, the folded scarlet coat, the vanished satchel was no random act. It had been a message, a warning, a calculated move to protect the illicit empire from exposure. Lila's brilliance, her integrity, had directly challenged this network, and she had paid the ultimate price. The weight of decades of silence and injustice pressed on Calla. Every record confirmed what she already feared. The perpetrators had believed themselves untouchable. Lila's sacrifice was more than personal, it was a shield for history itself. And now, 41 years later, justice, long delayed, was within reach. Story-driven engagement whispered through the moment. But what Calla discovered next would make the depth of this betrayal undeniable. With the plate secured and every record accounted for, Calla could see the full extent of Lila's foresight. The index card, the carefully marked Vault 41, the pattern of the Elias Vance Society's hidden dealings. It all converged into a chilling clarity. The theft, the cover-up, and Lila's murder were no longer fragments of a story. They were a single, grim truth. Each discovery brought the detective closer to the realization that the crime had been committed not out of sudden impulse, but out of cold calculation. The people Lila had trusted, the very individuals who had seemed like allies, had plotted to protect their fortune and reputation at any cost. The plates, worth more than anyone could fully grasp, were the keystone of the deception, and for 41 years, the world had remained unaware, the injustice festering quietly beneath a veneer of normalcy. Calla reviewed her notes once more, tracing the timeline and reconstructing the night in question. Every decision Lila had made carrying the plates, photographing them, even the route she chose to walk home was deliberate, a silent resistance against those who underestimated her. The detective could almost hear Lila's thoughts, sharp and unyielding, guiding the search from decades past. As the pieces clicked together, the enormity of the betrayal became undeniable. Lila's murder was a direct response to her courage, her refusal to be silenced. The vault, the plates, the records, they were not just evidence. They were a testament to her brilliance and integrity. Community-building engagement urged viewers to reflect. We all thought this was just a missing student, but it was so much deeper. The weight of truth, long obscured, now demanded recognition. The Elias Vance Society had always carried an air of quiet prestige. For decades, it had been celebrated as a sanctuary for Wisconsin's most obscure artifacts. A private world where history could be preserved away from prying eyes. Yet, behind its polished reputation, the founder's personal record told a different story. In dusty archives and forgotten financial ledgers, subtle discrepancies surfaced, acquisitions made without clear provenance, transactions that skirted standard oversight, and donations that conveniently vanished from public notice. Those who had questioned these irregularities were quietly dismissed, their concerns recorded in footnotes no one seemed to read. Local historians had murmured warnings, museum curators had felt uneasy, yet no formal investigation had ever taken place. The Society's founder had built a network of influence, enlisting loyal members and trusted scholars who, knowingly or not, perpetuated the concealment. Calla's eyes scanned the decades-old documents, each line revealing a careful pattern of opportunism. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that the stolen photographic plates were not a random prize. They were part of a long history of calculated acquisitions, taken for private gain, while the public remained none the wiser. Every receipt, every ledger entry hinted at the lengths to which the founder would go to protect his legacy, and, when threatened, to eliminate anyone who could expose him. Even after 40 years, the Society's shadow lingered. Each piece of evidence whispered a simple truth. The world that seemed safe, orderly, and honorable had been quietly manipulated. Lila Smith, in her brilliance, had stumbled into this network, and her disappearance was not an isolated tragedy, it was a collision with a legacy of greed and secrecy that spanned decades. Every trace of Lila's work now carried renewed significance. The missing photographic plates were no longer just fragile artifacts. They were pieces of a puzzle that exposed decades of careful deceit. Calla traced each transaction, each acquisition, noting patterns that aligned unnervingly with the timeline of Lila's research. The plates she had safeguarded were not merely historical curiosities, they represented proof of a hidden commerce in priceless artifacts, evidence the Elias Vance Society could never allow to surface. Finch had long suspected the motive lay in the stolen plates, but only now did their true weight become clear. The founder's network had ensured that those with access to Lila, and by extension the plates, were shielded from scrutiny. Every scholar, every assistant, every seemingly loyal associate had played a role, willingly or not, in maintaining a facade of legitimacy. The plates, tucked away or traded quietly among insiders, were a key to understanding the founder's pattern, a chain of silent theft that reached far beyond Madison. Calla's investigation revealed a chilling irony. Lila's brilliance had both illuminated and endangered the truth. In documenting the plates, she had unwittingly placed herself at the center of a scheme that had quietly enriched those in positions of trust. The plates were not merely objects. They were a threat, a testament that the founder's carefully constructed empire rested on secrecy and intimidation. Each connection, each line of evidence, tightened the focus. The missing plates had been more than a target, they were a symbol of power, a challenge to those who believed themselves untouchable. And in uncovering this link, Calla edged closer to exposing the individual who would go to extraordinary lengths to ensure those plates and the secrets they carried remained hidden. With the founder's past exposed and the plate's significance clarified, attention shifted to those closest to the society. Every name in the organization's membership roster, every associate connected to Lila, came under careful review. Patterns emerged, contacts, meetings, and access privileges that narrowed the circle of potential perpetrators. Calla's team mapped timelines, cross-referencing alibis with the society's records, each detail painting a clearer, yet more disturbing picture. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the links became. Individuals once considered harmless, respected, even trusted, now appeared to have had both motive and opportunity. The network was tight-knit. Loyalty, familial ties, and professional ambition intertwined in ways that shielded the guilty. One misstep could collapse the carefully maintained illusion of innocence, and Calla knew every subtle error left in the archival documents could be the thread that unraveled decades of hidden crimes. Finch's old notes were invaluable. While the initial investigation had focused on immediate suspects around Lila's disappearance, Calla expanded the scope. She examined relationships, rivalries, and the quiet influence of senior figures. Connections between financial records and personal correspondence revealed access points to the missing plates. Each potential suspect carried a shadow of responsibility. Yet, who had the courage or desperation to act? The stakes were high. Every individual scrutinized was part of a system that had survived for decades. Protected by secrecy and intimidation, Calla could feel the tension rise with each discovery, each link tightening the circle. The truth seemed within reach, yet the question remained. Who had crossed the line that night in 1982? Committing an act so ruthless it silenced a brilliant young scholar and hid the evidence for over 40 years? Among the tangled web of associates, one name kept surfacing: Preston Sterling. Initially dismissed, the son of Lila's mentor had remained under the radar, trusted implicitly by colleagues and neighbors alike. Yet, as Calla traced access to the Elias Vance Society's archives, every path converged on him. His proximity to both Lila and the plates, combined with his personal ties to the founder's inner circle, positioned him as a central figure in the decades-long concealment. Calla pored over the old case files, noting the subtle anomalies, appointments, late-night errands, and discrepancies in recollections. Each fragment of evidence, when viewed through the lens of modern analysis, painted a more troubling picture. Preston had been present that night, close enough to witness Lila's determination to protect her research, and he had the knowledge necessary to manipulate the environment, leaving traces of intent without immediate detection. The plates, silent witnesses to the crime, were proof of both motive and opportunity. Preston's familiarity with Lila's work and the society's practices suggested a calculated awareness of what must be done to secure the stolen items. Calla's team considered the psychological dimension. A young man, influenced by a father whose authority was unquestioned, faced with a decision that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. As the investigation honed in on Preston, the tension became nearly tangible. Every move, every historical record, every recollection from decades past seemed to guide the narrative toward him. The silent, meticulous orchestration of events in 1982 was now becoming clear through the lens of modern investigation. One question remained, pressing and unavoidable. Could the evidence, long dormant and overlooked, finally prove the unthinkable, that the man who had lived among the grieving and the oblivious was the one responsible for a life lost and a decades-long secret buried? With Preston Sterling's involvement emerging as more than a possibility, Calla's team intensified their focus. Every archived document, every financial transaction, and every recorded interaction was re-examined, revealing subtle patterns of manipulation and concealment. The picture of 1982 became sharper, an image of calculated intent, hidden beneath the routines of daily life. Details once overlooked gained new significance. Preston's movements on the night of Lila's disappearance aligned with opportunities to access the plates. His connections within the Elias Vance Society provided him with knowledge unavailable to anyone outside the circle. Calla recognized that these were not random coincidences. They were the careful footprints of someone intent on protecting secrets that had remained buried for decades. The forensic breakthroughs strengthened the narrative. DNA evidence, previously inconclusive, now hinted at familial links consistent with the Sterling lineage. Each trace of genetic material, when combined with archival research, suggested a direct connection between Preston and the stolen plates. Calla could feel the tension of history pressing forward, decades of silence, fear, and loyalty converging toward a single individual. The emotional weight was undeniable. The young woman whose brilliance had inspired so many had been betrayed by the very environment she trusted. Preston, once invisible within the shadow of his father's influence, now stood illuminated by the relentless light of investigation. Calla understood that confronting him would reveal the culmination of years of deception, fear, and desperation. As the circle tightened, the question became inevitable. Could all the threads of evidence, documents, testimony, and modern forensic breakthroughs be enough to confront the man who had spent 41 years living freely, while the truth of his actions remained hidden? The answer was coming, and it would shake the foundations of everything the community thought it knew. The investigation had narrowed, and all signs pointed toward one individual who had spent decades walking freely among those who mourned Lila. Preston Sterling, once dismissed as an unremarkable presence, suddenly became the center of the storm. To the community, he was a history teacher, gentle, composed, the kind of person parents trusted to guide their children. To Calla Reyes, he was the man whose DNA and connections aligned too closely with the evidence to be ignored. Every meeting Preston had attended, every casual interaction, now held new weight. The young man who had watched Lila vanish that night had aged into a life of quiet routine, his true involvement hidden beneath a carefully maintained facade. Calla reviewed the decades-old case files and noted his movements on the night of October 15th, 1982. The timing, the presence at the gathering, and his access to both Lila and the Elias Vance Society all aligned. Nothing was coincidental. The emotional intensity of the revelation was profound. This was not an outsider, a stranger lurking in the shadows. This was someone the town had accepted, someone whose friendly demeanor had masked a desperate, calculated choice. Each piece of evidence, from preserved DNA to his documented presence near the stolen plates, began to converge into a narrative too precise to be ignored. Calla understood the gravity. Every day that passed without scrutiny had allowed him to embed himself in the community, while the truth of his actions remained hidden. Now, for the first time in over 40 years, the case against him was tangible. The quiet teacher, the neighbor, the son of a respected academic, he was no longer invisible. He was the one they had been searching for, and the moment of confrontation was drawing closer. The breakthrough came from a single, preserved hair found in the collar of Lila's scarlet coat. 41 years had passed, and yet, modern forensic science was about to illuminate what the 1982 investigation could not. Calla Reyes held her breath as the laboratory completed the Y chromosome extraction. The result was undeniable, a familial match connecting the hair to the Sterling lineage. It wasn't just any match. It pointed directly toward Preston, the son of Lila's mentor, a man whose presence at the celebratory gathering had once seemed inconsequential. Every overlooked detail suddenly carried weight. The DNA evidence, combined with the historical connections to the Elias Vance Society, left no room for ambiguity. Calla reviewed the data again and again, as if staring harder could undo the decades of quiet deception. The community's image of Preston as a kind, mild-mannered teacher fractured under the weight of the revelation. Here was a man who had evaded suspicion for decades, hidden in plain sight, and yet the threads of his involvement were woven tightly into the very evidence the police had preserved. The scientific clarity made the narrative undeniable. The crime had a direct, living link, one that could no longer be ignored. Forensic technology had finally given voice to the evidence Lila had left behind. The trace, the hair, The preserved fibers' decades-old minutiae now screamed in the light of modern analysis. Calla knew that this familial connection was more than circumstantial. It was the first solid step toward justice. The bridge between a vanished young woman and the man who had helped ensure her silence. The revelation carried an unbearable tension, a mix of relief and dread. Finally, the investigation had a living target, and the fragile threads of truth, once dormant, now demanded to be followed to their conclusion. The archival search of Vault 41 revealed the final, damning piece of evidence. Hidden among the fragile daguerreotype plates, one bore a nearly invisible fingerprint, preserved by the controlled environment of the storage room. It was faint, almost ghost-like, but forensic experts confirmed it matched Preston Sterling, a touch 4 decades old, now illuminated by modern technology, connecting him inextricably to the stolen plates that had driven Lila's final hours. Calla held the plate in her gloved hands, her mind racing. Every detail from 1982. The stolen satchel, the neatly folded scarlet coat, the vanished photographic plates converged in this single, undeniable fact. Preston's connection was no longer speculative. The fingerprint, when paired with the DNA from the coat, painted a chilling portrait of premeditation and betrayal. The implications were staggering. A man trusted by colleagues, a familiar face in Madison, had carried out a crime that had haunted an entire community for more than 40 years. The theft of the plates wasn't random, it was personal, deliberate, and orchestrated to hide a family secret. The evidence was not just forensic, it was moral, exposing the collapse of trust and the weight of concealed ambition. Calla knew that this fingerprint was the keystone. It tied a living suspect directly to the physical evidence Lila had sacrificed her life to protect. For the first time since that October evening, the investigation had concrete proof of action, and the narrative shifted from cold case to impending justice. Each minute of silence in the lab amplified the gravity of the discovery. Here lay the last obstacle between truth and decades of deception. The fingerprint demanded accountability. The case, long dormant, was finally alive, its resolution no longer a question of if, but when. Preston Sterling's motives began to crystallize under the weight of evidence. The stolen plates were more than historical artifacts, they were proof of his father's long-hidden scheme. A decades-old plan to profit from the illicit acquisition and sale of priceless pieces of Wisconsin history. Lila's confrontation that night had threatened to expose everything. She had seen through the carefully constructed facade and refused to be silenced with promises or intimidation. Preston, 22 at the time, and caught between filial loyalty and opportunity, had made a choice that turned ambition and desperation into deadly action. He had acted to protect not only his father's reputation but the shadow of the Sterling family's legacy. The control, the secrecy, and the quiet manipulation were all threads he had internalized, only to unravel in the most tragic way imaginable. Forensic evidence now cast the long shadow of that night across decades. DNA, fingerprints, and the reconstructed timeline revealed that Preston's hands, both figuratively and literally, had shaped the outcome of Lila's life. The crime was no longer an abstract mystery. It was a human story of fear, loyalty, and moral compromise. As Calla pieced the narrative together, the betrayal of trust and the magnitude of loss became clear. Lila's brilliance, her integrity, and her unwavering commitment to truth had collided with Preston's desperate choices. The family name, once a symbol of respectability and guidance, now carried the weight of complicity and murder. The plates, silent witnesses to the crime, connected generations and motives, showing that ambition can fester quietly in familiar places, erupting when confronted by conscience. The investigation had shifted from evidence collection to moral reckoning, the human cost of secrets that refused to stay buried. Every piece of the puzzle now pointed squarely to Preston Sterling. The DNA extracted from the coat matched him. The fingerprint preserved on the stolen photographic plate sealed the connection, and the timeline of events left no room for doubt. What had once been speculation and theory was now a chain of proof that could not be ignored. Detective Calla Reyes watched as the final barriers of uncertainty crumbled. The human element, the fear, the loyalty, the desperation was etched into every detail of the case. Preston, the mild-mannered teacher, the familiar face in the community, was the same man who had, decades earlier, extinguished the life of a young scholar. The weight of the evidence was crushing. No longer was this a cold case frozen in time. It was an indictment of a life lived under the guise of respectability. The moral reckoning was unavoidable. Every lead, every clue, every painstakingly preserved fragment of the past converged to reveal the undeniable truth. The perpetrator had been among them all along, shielded by familiarity and the false comfort of trust. With the evidence now irrefutable, the stage was set for the arrest that would shock Madison and finally offer the closure that Lila Smith's family had waited 41 years to receive. The quiet of a Tuesday afternoon shattered like fragile glass. Preston Sterling, a man known to everyone as the mild-mannered history teacher, the friendly neighbor, the familiar face in Madison's classrooms, was escorted in handcuffs from his modest home. Cameras flashed, a chaotic rhythm of disbelief and exposure, as news crews captured the impossible truth. The boyish smile, the calm demeanor, the very man who had walked the same streets as Lila Smith for decades, had finally been unmasked. The murmurs in the town swelled into a collective gasp that seemed to echo down every avenue, up every brick-lined street, and through the halls of every school where he had taught. Parents clutched their children closer. Students, who had once debated under his gentle guidance, now whispered in hushed tones. Friends exchanged glances, searching for signs they might have missed. The town had trusted him, believed in him, and now, that trust lay in ruins. Each step he took toward the waiting squad car carried the weight of 41 years of unanswered questions, silent grief, and the shadow of a life stolen from Lila Smith. Detectives, still processing the culmination of decades of tireless work, maintained their stoic facades, though their eyes betrayed the mix of relief and sorrow. The streets, usually buzzing with mundane chatter, seemed frozen, as if Madison itself had paused to absorb the enormity of the revelation. Questions spiraled in every household. How could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such a calculated act? How did the face of civility mask a hidden violence for so long? And here, before we press further into the confession, take a moment. If you aren't already subscribed, now is the time. Do not risk missing the full story of justice finally reaching its mark. Comment below if you haven't subscribed yet, and let us know why you're hesitating, because in a moment, every secret that has been buried for decades will surface. The arrest rippled through Madison like an unexpected winter storm, catching everyone off guard. In cafes, offices, and classrooms, conversations stumbled into disbelief. People who had walked past Preston Sterling daily, the friendly neighbor, the debate coach, the smiling teacher, now questioned everything they thought they knew. Whispers of betrayal threaded through the air, leaving a palpable tension that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn chill. Friends of Lila, now older, felt a mix of vindication and anger. For decades, they had carried the quiet torment of uncertainty, the gnawing what-ifs that had haunted every anniversary of her disappearance. The Smith family, especially Owen, who had spent 41 years in a haze of grief and hope, moved through the town with a renewed, if fragile, sense of closure. Yet the relief was bitter, sharp, and laced with the understanding that someone they had trusted had shattered not just one life, but an entire community's sense of safety. Local authorities reported calls from residents, neighbors expressing shock, fear, and a sense of disbelief. Teachers confided they felt unsafe. Parents admitted to reevaluating whom they trusted around their children, and the students who once admired Preston now struggled to reconcile their memories with the man in handcuffs. Every street corner, every familiar building, became a silent witness to the unraveling of a trust that had taken decades to build. And the town asked itself, again and again, how could a person live among us, quietly participating in daily life, while harboring such a dark, destructive secret? Before we continue into the chilling confession, take a moment. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment to secure your front row seat to the truth. Those who hesitate risk missing how justice finally arrived after 4 decades. Comment below why you won't subscribe before you lose the full story. The interrogation room was silent, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the slow, deliberate scratching of a pen taking notes. Preston Sterling, once a figure of calm and composure, sat across from Detective Calla Reyes, his hands trembling ever so slightly. The weight of 41 years had finally caught up with him, and the web of lies, carefully maintained, began to fray. Faced with the incontrovertible DNA match and the fingerprint on the daguerreotype plates, Preston's defenses crumbled. He spoke haltingly at first, a voice strained and brittle, recounting the night Lila Smith had confronted him and his father. His words painted a chilling picture of desperation. A son entangled in a scheme of greed and deceit, cornered by the unwavering integrity of a young woman who refused to look the other way. Every detail he revealed carved deeper into the truth long obscured. How he had followed Lila, how the carefully folded coat was meant to mislead, how the plates had been hidden to protect the scheme, and how a single night of panic had extinguished a brilliant life. Each revelation was a hammer blow to the illusions held by a town that had trusted him, shaking the foundation of ordinary life. Calla Reyes documented every confession, her face unreadable, her mind piecing together the final chapters that had eluded investigators for decades. Preston's admission transformed suspicion into undeniable fact, giving voice to a tragedy that had remained silent far too long. And now, viewers, as you hear the truth of a life stolen and a decades-long deception finally revealed, don't let yourself be on the sidelines. Subscribe immediately, or risk missing the full account of how justice, delayed but relentless, caught up at last. Comment below if you're still hesitating. Why would you turn away from the truth after all these years? 2 days after Preston's confession, the ground outside the Elias Vance Society was broken once more. Investigators followed his precise directions, leading them to a shallow, forgotten grave nestled at the edge of the property. The earth, hardened by decades of Wisconsin winters, gave way with a reluctant groan, revealing the tragic remains of Lila Smith, wrapped carefully, as if even in death someone had attempted to grant her dignity. The discovery was both heartbreaking and relieving. Decades of unanswered questions, fear, and silent grief culminated in this moment. Owen Smith, now older, felt a complex torrent of emotions: relief, sorrow, and the gnawing weight of what had been taken from him and the community. The scene was quiet, save for the low murmurs of officers and the crunch of winter underfoot. Each object found with Lila, the remnants of her satchel, traces of the rare photographic plates, told a story of the night her life had been stolen. It was proof, tangible and haunting, that the young woman who had vanished 41 years ago had endured a fate too cruel, too calculated, to ever be forgotten. Viewers, don't turn away now. Subscribe to witness how justice finally unfolded. And if you hesitate, comment why you won't engage with the truth of what happens when betrayal hides in plain sight. With Lila's remains recovered and Preston Sterling in custody, Madison began the slow, painful process of reckoning. For Owen Smith, decades of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and haunting what-ifs finally found a grim resolution. Standing at the edge of the grave, he felt both the emptiness of loss and the faint relief that the truth had at last been uncovered. The community, once gripped by fear and suspicion, now faced the shocking reality that someone they had trusted had committed an unthinkable crime. Conversations in homes, cafes, and on campus shifted from whispered speculation to an acknowledgement of betrayal and the power of persistent justice. Residents who had carried the weight of uncertainty for over 40 years could finally begin to release it. Detective Calla Reyes, Owen, and the officers involved knew that while justice had been served, the scars of this case would remain. Lila's brilliance, her ambition, and her courage would not be forgotten. They became symbols of resilience and the enduring quest for truth. If you value seeing truth revealed, Subscribe now and stay part of a community that refuses to let stories like this fade. And if you hesitate, comment below why you won't commit to witnessing justice, even when it finally arrives. The truth had finally surfaced, and the weight of decades pressed down on Madison like the winter frost that had long ago blanketed its streets. Owen Smith stood quietly at the edge of the lake, staring at the dark water that had been both witness and accomplice to a crime that stole his sister from him. 41 years of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and quiet anguish were condensed into this single, unbearable moment. The community, too, felt the ripple of revelation. Friends, neighbors, students, and even strangers who had followed the story for years, all confronting a mixture of relief and a simmering fury. Families whispered about what could have been done differently, about the failures of trust, and about the ordinary lives interrupted by extraordinary deceit. Conversations that had lain dormant for decades erupted once more in quiet homes, offices, and local cafes. Every corner of the town seemed to echo with a haunting question. How could someone so gentle and well-regarded conceal such darkness for so long? Owen's grief was layered sorrow for the sister he lost, rage at the betrayal by someone close to her world, and exhaustion from a lifetime of uncertainty. He reflected not only on the crime itself but on the community's own complicity in overlooking warning signs, trusting appearances over scrutiny. This revelation was a mirror held up to Madison, a city that had allowed fear, respectability, and time to mask the truth. Even in the quiet aftermath, a subtle unease remained. Justice had arrived, but it could not reclaim the stolen years. The question now was, how to move forward, to honor the memory of Lila Smith, while carrying the heavy knowledge of the darkness that once walked openly among them. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, if you value uncovering the full truth, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd be captivated by this story. Lila Smith's memory lingered in Madison like the first chill of winter, sharp, unforgettable, and impossible to ignore. Her laughter, her relentless curiosity, the fire in her eyes that drove her through long nights at the museum, and the brilliance she carried in every interaction became the heartbeat of a story that refused to fade. For those who knew her, the grief was not only for the years she was denied, but for the untapped potential, the conversations that would never happen, the discoveries that would never be made. Friends recalled evenings spent in the glow of her enthusiasm, moments when she seemed to challenge the world and invite others to rise to the same heights. Her family carried a quieter, heavier weight, the sorrow of knowing that love, protection, and guidance had not been enough to shield her from the cruelty she encountered. Madison, too, had learned the cost of overlooking subtle truths, of trusting appearances over instinct, and of allowing respectability to overshadow accountability. As investigators reflected on the decades-long search, Lila's integrity shone brightest against the shadows of greed, deceit, and silence. She had not been careless. She had acted with courage, safeguarding evidence that would one day expose the betrayal hidden within her closest circles. Her choices, her bravery, and her refusal to compromise her principles became a testament not only to her character, but to the enduring power of truth. Her story reminded everyone who followed it that brilliance could coexist with vulnerability, and that one person's determination could finally illuminate what had been hidden for far too long. Lila's legacy, etched into the memories of her family, her friends, and her community, became a call to action, to honor the disappeared, to question the comfortable, and to never let silence triumph over justice. The shadow of greed stretched across Madison for decades, invisible yet suffocating, hiding in the smiles of those trusted most. The Elias Vance Society, once a quiet institution devoted to history, had become a stage for betrayal, secrecy, and illicit gain. Priceless artifacts were stolen, knowledge commodified, and ambition twisted into something lethal. Lila Smith, with her unwavering moral compass, had seen the cracks in this veneer. Her determination to expose the theft made her a target, her brilliance a threat to those who preferred profit over honesty. The Sterling family, guardians of both trust and corruption, had allowed ambition to turn into crime. Preston Sterling's desperate actions were a direct reflection of the toxic influence of greed, the way it corrupts judgment, silences conscience, and forces ordinary lives into catastrophic choices. The consequences of their actions were not abstract. They were measured in the years of pain endured by Lila's family, the anxiety that gripped a community, and the lives that remained haunted by fear. Madison had watched, powerless, as a story of ambition and scholarship was stolen by those who valued wealth and influence over integrity. The stolen photographic plates were more than historical objects. They were symbols of truth, evidence of human weakness and moral failure. The case proved that greed can incubate quietly, feeding on loyalty, and waiting for an opportunity to erupt into tragedy. For investigators, the decades-long pursuit of justice became a stark reminder that crimes motivated by avarice are often the most meticulously hidden and the hardest to expose. Lila's death was a warning and a lesson. The pursuit of profit without conscience can destroy not just possessions, but lives, and that justice, no matter how delayed, must eventually confront those who think they are untouchable. Decades passed, and the Lila Smith case lingered in the shadows of Madison's history, a wound that refused to heal. For every lead that went cold, every suspect cleared, and every dead end that frustrated the department, there were investigators who refused to surrender. Detective Alistair Finch had carried the burden of failure for years. The haunting image of Lila's neatly folded coat burned into his memory. Though retirement came, the weight of an unresolved tragedy never left him. Then came Detective Calla Reyes, a new generation armed with technology that Finch could only have dreamed of. Her determination was relentless, fueled by both curiosity and a moral compass that demanded justice for lives stolen too soon. She sifted through brittle files, decades-old photographs, and trace evidence that others had deemed insignificant. Every strand of hair, every faint fingerprint, every overlooked note became a thread she would follow, connecting the past to the present with precision and unwavering focus. The resilience of these investigators was not measured by speed or accolades, but by endurance and conviction. They worked through skepticism, bureaucratic obstacles, and the gnawing frustration of years spent chasing shadows. Their persistence was a testament to the idea that even the most cold, calculated crimes cannot escape time, and that truth, when pursued with patience and skill, has a way of rising from the darkest corners. In the end, it was the combined efforts of Finch's dedication and Reyes's innovation that brought closure to the Smith family and exposed the corruption hiding in plain sight. Their work reminded the world that justice is not an instant reward. It is a pursuit that demands courage, resilience, and a refusal to allow deceit and greed to triumph. Without their unyielding efforts, Lila's story might have remained a haunting question mark, an unresolved sorrow lingering forever in Madison. The Lila Smith case leaves behind more than answers. It delivers a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the cost of unchecked ambition. A brilliant life was stolen, not by a stranger, but by someone who moved among those closest to her, hiding behind respectability and familiarity. It shows how greed can warp morality, twisting family loyalty and scholarly ambition into deadly motives. For the community, the arrest of Preston Sterling forced a painful confrontation with reality. The people they trusted, the faces they smiled at, could carry shadows of unspeakable deeds. For Owen Smith, decades of anguish culminated in bitter closure, a reminder that grief can endure far longer than the lives it mourns. Yet even the longest pain can eventually meet justice. The investigators' persistence, across generations, offers a vital lesson. Truth can be delayed, but it cannot be extinguished. Evidence forgotten or overlooked can emerge decades later, shining a light on deception, betrayal, and hidden crimes. And now, to you, the viewer, this story serves as both warning and invitation. Subscribe now, or risk being unprepared the next time a story hides deadly secrets in plain sight. If you don't, leave a comment explaining why. The world is full of stories waiting to expose what some hope will remain hidden, and missing them could leave you powerless in the face of truth.